syndrome that I'm going to talk about, only 12% or 1 in 8 Americans, and let's not just call them Americans, let's call them Europeans, Australians, pretty much international, especially in terms of first world, but most countries in the world are suffering metabolically. And so only 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy. Now, what do they look at and how do they come up with this number? So we're going to talk about metabolic syndrome, about the aspects of it, and essentially what the big problem is when it is out. So if only 1 in 8 are really healthy, what's happening in terms of most other people today, or most normal people today? We'll talk about the causes and we'll talk about the solutions. And then, like I said, at the end, I'm going to introduce something that hopefully is exciting for you also in terms of the work forward. So metabolic syndrome. In terms of metabolic, what does it mean? It means how we use our energy. And this syndrome encompasses a few markers. I'm going to talk about it. But let's just say a person who's not able to burn, to use energy optimally. And what happens is if there's too much fuel in the tank, so to speak, it causes some issues. Big one, heart disease, which is still a #1 killer today. So if you have metabolic issues, you double the likelihood of having a heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular diseases. The second big one, which we're seeing more and more, is type 2 diabetes. So if you remember, type 1 is where insulin is not produced, and generally it was the childhood version. And since having insulin, that made such a difference to those, especially children. But type 2 is insulin resistance, when insulin is not doing its job to lower that blood sugar. And type 3, we're seeing a lot today, which actually, I'll jump past the fatty liver, but talk about the roles on the mental. So dementia, Alzheimer's, calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So we're seeing rises in Alzheimer's, rises in dementias. Fatty liver, going back to that, seeing a lot of that today. And liver is the most amazing organ. It puts up with so much. I call it the Wolverine organ. And when it just gets bashed and bashed, when the liver starts shutting down, then we've got some big problems. And so blood sugar regulation, blood sugar stored in the liver, processed in the liver. When the liver is not working, then we have a myriad of problems. And finally, in terms of aging, not just the outside, but the inside, inflammation, oxidation, hormonal changes, hormones decreasing at a faster rate. They go down as we get older, but they shouldn't go off a cliff. We shouldn't have constant fire in our cells breaking down to the degree that we're seeing today, which is why I talk about previous generation potentially being the benchmark or the oldest. And from now on, we're not living as long and healthy as our previous generations. So metabolic syndrome, how do we classify it? If I had a choice, I would add a few more things to this, but this is the standard test that is considered in there. And there are 5 major tests. And what they did with that study out of America, where they said only 12% were healthy, only 12% of people fit into these categories. And I'm going to talk about optimal in a moment. So these are normal ranges. Only, so 1 in 8 had all of these ranges in the norm. So they started with a waist circumference, talking about for males, if they had under 102 centimeters, or females under 88, tick. Above that, obviously, first problem. Fasting glucose. We're going to talk a lot in the next months about getting that glucose level. But if it was over 100, or if you're in the international years, 5.6, that added to that list. Triglycerides over 150. I'll show my reference range for triglycerides. 150 is way too high in my opinion, or the 1.7 millimoles. The HDLC, what we call good cholesterol, and it's the recirculating. So it does have some important parts to this heart disease, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome picture when used in relation to other testing. So here we talk about having greater than 40 for men, 50 for women, and the equivalents in the international scale. And then finally, we look at blood pressure, over 130, over 85. If you ticked all these boxes, you were in that great 1 in 8, or that 12% category. Most people, sadly today, most adults are not in that category. So what do I like? So what's the goal in terms of optimization? Well, first of all, you see, I've taken off the waist measurement. I've taken it off specifically. What is an optimal waist measurement for people? My first thing is for a person actually to look at values. I often talk about, and clients, some of you will know that I say weight loss as a side effect of optimal health. And when we focus too much on the physical changes, I have to lose weight, have to reduce the belly, we can often do shortcuts. And we can often do it in a way, especially if I talk about values, that don't lead us to self-care, self-love, self-respect, those sort of important values. So the goal comes first and we end up the actions not supporting those values. And then we can get into trouble. And I see that very often, people taking a lot of shortcuts that are not healthy and in the short term on the scale get a result, but perhaps oftentimes not in their body composition like the waist. So in terms of looking at waist, first is to get it under those levels that were in normal, but really honing in, really focusing on those other levels. For one, fasting glucose, getting it consistently and in a fasted state under 85. And we're going to focus a lot on that. But those who remember or have worked with me on blood sugar will know that when you get below that 85, you get into that zone where you're starting to use your own fuel for energy, and you're raising the blood sugar to obviously to keep it balanced. So getting that fasting glucose below that 85. Now, some people, I will add, myself included, sometimes will do a fasting glucose from waking up, and because of the dawn phenomenon, waking up and cortisol rising your blood sugar, your fasting glucose, then it can be a little bit higher. But consistently, we want to see it under that 85 as long as possible during the day. So you're in that zone that is balanced, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Triglycerides. So if you remember previously, it was 150, less than 150. My aim is under 80. And actually as close with the HDL, so you see greater than 50 here, those two as close together as possible. There's actually some good studies that compare the triglycerides to the HDL and very successful looking at predictions for heart disease. So I like those as part of the full lipid to be compared. Total cholesterol today, it's really flawed. It doesn't give us a lot of information. I've heard that a lot from some really great cardiologists I follow and listen to. HDL, triglycerides, they're really important to see. Do you have like their relationship to each other? So getting it under 80 for sure. That's a goal. And how we do it, we use our own fuel. So if you remember, what is a triglyceride? A triglyceride is the fat in your blood that the liver is pumping out. So if your liver is unhappy, and that's where we see a fatty liver will be pushing out triglycerides. And I'll talk about some of the biggest reasons for that. But it's a big problem I see today. And the relationships between high triglycerides and heart disease are very strong. HDL, like I said, it is the amount of cholesterol that's recirculating or coming back to the liver to be processed. So previously it was 40 and 50, males, females respectively. Now it's a bit higher. So we want to tie. And like I said, if I could have a person's HDL, say it's a man at 60 or say a female at 60 and their triglycerides at 60, that for me is a great sign. And that's an aim to work towards in terms of optimization. Blood pressure. So previously might have talked about 130, 85, trying to get it under that 115, 75. We used to use 120/80 as the kind of norm, but seeing it a little bit lower sees some benefits. Okay, so they're the four markers that I really want people to focus on. And a lot of those markers you could do at your local pharmacy. I see a lot of pharmacists, chemists, as we say in Australia, doing the full lipid panel with the cholesterol. So part of that cholesterol is the total cholesterol, the HDL, the LDL, what they call bad cholesterol, a bit more complex, but the triglycerides, those are grouped in together, those tests, and many pharmacies do them nowadays. So you could just go in and check out where you stand. Obviously, they do the blood pressure if you don't have a machine also. Fasting glucose machine, we'll talk about that. Hopefully you all have one, or we'll get some access to either a constant glucose meter regularly or a manual one that I generally use here. Okay, so what are the main drivers for this metabolic syndrome? Well, first and foremost, insulin, lowering the blood sugar, is not doing its job. So if you don't have insulin very sensitive, the opposite is resistance. And in my talks, I often describe how insulin plays like a fireman's role. So as the fire, the energy in your blood, so the blood sugar, the energy rises, insulin's job is to keep it in check and to lower it if it gets too high. The better, the more sensitive insulin, the more balanced your blood sugar, and the lower the blood sugar on a healthy scale. So if insulin, and we're needing a lot more insulin, and say the fasting insulin marker, which would be interesting adding to that along with a HbA1c, I like them, especially the HbA1c. But if we see that rising, we see the amount of blood that's stuck to the cell, that's HbA1c, how much sugar is stuck to the cell. If we see that high, it means that insulin is not bringing blood sugar down regularly. That's a problem. If a person does have a lot of the visceral fat, that's fat basically, it's in the belly, but it's around the organ. So in terms of around the liver, that's where a fatty liver is an inflamed liver. This fat in terms of visceral fat is very inflammatory, very damaging. I sent a video or showed a video of Dr. Sean O'Mara about fermented foods, and he is classically known as the visceral fat doctor, that specialist. Very big on not too many carbohydrates, a meat-based diet with fermented vegetables, a really healthy microbiome. But excess visceral fat is a big issue we see today. In terms of poor diet, related to that diet, the classics are high in refined carbs, so breads, pastas, what they told us with the food pyramid, eat mostly breads and grains, and sugar and processed foods that stimulate appetite, that affect our microbiome, all these additives, colorings, flavorings, and refined foods, refined fats, those vegetables, they're affecting our insulin, they're affecting our microbiome. So a poor diet is a big driver today. Sedentary lifestyle, if we don't use it, we move our body, we lose it, and we lose that sensitivity. That's the problem. Insulin really needs exercise to be sensitive. It needs as much muscle mass as a person can pack on. It needs that blood flow within the body. So exercise being an absolute critical part, and a sedentary sitting at the desk all day is a big problem. So that's why we often talk about getting up. If you're stuck at the desk, get up as often as you can. Chronic stress, poor sleep, cortisol. So remember, cortisol's job, it's the fight or flight hormone. It's the stress response because it raises your blood sugar. What happens if cortisol is constantly pumping your blood sugar up? It's disrupting your hormones. It's affecting your hormones. It's reducing your progesterone and testosterone and thyroid hormones, all these critical hormones. It's pushing insulin over the edge. So many people have had insulin resistance because of stress driving it. And stress, high stress, cortisol will say, I'll do some of the work, but I'm going to influence you. I'm going to make you want sugar. And that becomes a real battle of people who chronically just need that raise in their blood sugar. So they'll seek the sugar, seek the refined carbohydrates. So chronic stress, poor sleep, big problems. Hormonal imbalances, PCOS. So what's called polycystic ovarian syndrome, for those who don't know what it is related, very much related. They talk about studies of over 70% of PCOS, especially younger girls, teenage girls into early 20s, are metabolically connected. So basically their blood sugar is driving this hormonal imbalance. We're seeing a lot of that today. Low testosterone, thyroid dysfunctions have a definite relationship between metabolic syndrome, between high stress that is driving insulin not doing its job. So they're the big parts. And when we talk about how that looks, I'll go to a chart in a moment, but just a information. When it comes to blood sugar, we're always told the way to lower it is to lower your salt. And for those who've heard me, they've heard me say it's a sugar problem, not a salt problem. With all the trials, it showed such a minimal, by cutting salt, not sugar, cutting salt right down, saw hardly any change, hardly any reduction in blood pressure, and not a dramatic or nothing in terms of mortality from cardiovascular disease. The issue is sugar. Sugar driving the inflammation, sugar affecting the hormones and affecting the blood vessel, damaging the blood vessel and causing problems. So for me, salt is absolutely critical. We should all be waking up with our bottle of water and putting some salt in there and going out and getting some sunshine and moving our body, because remember, we are electrical creatures. The cell doesn't run without minerals, and that's what salts are. They're minerals, sodium, chloride, but then let's add magnesium and potassium, all these other minerals. I often talk, if you were to have food poisoning, we get a few cases come out here, people come over and then end up in hospital, and I say, I'm sure they did this one test called blood electrolytes, and they would have put in you not a water solution, but a saline solution. Why did they not put water? Because it would have negatively affected, basically damaged cells, burst cells. So we need the salts, we need the minerals. And so going on a low salt diet was not in terms of beneficial. Go on a low sugar diet and then you'll see the blood pressure come down. So in terms of optimization, as I said, and this is a theme I'm going to carry over this month and the next, is our focus needs to be on blood sugar. Our job not to focus on the salt, in my opinion, is to focus on the blood sugar and to get it into the optimal ranges. So you'll see in terms of here, optimal between 70 to 85 in a fasted state. And I'll say in terms of fasting, I actually like it fasting for, if you had not eaten for 2 or 3 hours, I'd love to see it under 85. I'm aiming to see it under 85 to put you back in that window. So if I was to classify and break these windows down, if a person is mostly and often in that 70 to 85 range, they are in the fat burning, blood sugar balancing zone. Their focus, their concentration is better, their reduction of inflammation, reduction of all-cause mortality, heart attacks, cancer, the whole lot that are afflicting us today. That's what we want. When a person goes from 85 to 100, they're in what I call the neutral territory. They often don't gain, don't lose weight, but they're neutrally. And then when they go over that 100, now we're potentially gaining body fat. Person who does really serious training and pushes their blood sugar over 100 to feed the muscles, great. But if you are consistently over 100, chances are you're going to be gaining belly fat or fat around the body. So you see the difference there. Optimal, as long, as often as possible, 70 to 85. The normal is 70 to 100. Get over that 100. Now the doctor may, with some other tests like HbA1c, talk about pre-diabetes, and over that, the diabetes scale, again, they need other tests like HbA1c. What about after you've eaten? I want it, as I said, if you started at before eating at 80, I would love to see it get as close 2 hours later to that 80 mark. And so it really is a reflection in that regard to what you have eaten. That's the power of looking at blood sugar. You can measure your blood sugar before, have a meal, check it again and say, wow, that meal was good. So when someone says to me, Craig, is this food good or bad? Is this meal good for my health? Oftentimes I'll say, okay, well, number one, is it clean, real food? But number two, let's test it. And that's what we're going to be talking about, how we can regularly test so we can know what the difference is for our body. Because we know when it comes to the glycemic index, it's flawed. When we say, oh, that's a medium GI food, well, that was a medium that was averaged by 10 people. And some people, it was a big problem. Other people, it wasn't a problem. So we took those 10 measurements, averaged them out, and came up with a scale. For me, that's not good enough. That's not specific for each person, because each person has a different reaction, which is why we each have to do the work. We've got to put in the work. And if we put in the work and we learn it, do a month of blood sugar measurements, you'll learn so much that you'll know which foods and how you can really keep in that zone. So getting it definitely under 90, I'd like it even, if it goes under 85, same as if the optimal was sitting around, for some people, 70 to 75, perfect. That's what I'm aiming for myself. So you'll see the American Diabetes Association is absolute, like their ranges, I think 2 hours after eating, they want it under, their ideal is under 140. So you see that normal is to 140. For me, that's way too high. I don't ever want to see my blood sugar at 140. I want to keep it right down. And they're really interesting studies comparing those whose blood sugar spiked really high and came down low versus those who were more stable. Even perhaps they didn't go as low as the others, but those who had stable blood sugar had a lower all-cause mortality. So it's very clear. We don't want to have the body freaking out. I often joke about if my kids go off and go to a birthday party and come right up, what goes up must come down. So you feel it in your moods, your emotions, your focus. I love to try to have my focus consistent, my energy consistent. So food, obviously lifestyle plays a big role. So let's have a look at it. It's a bit small. I've posted this in the Facebook group. And so you'll see it in terms of previous posts, but the 4 foundations, everybody who's seen me knows about these 4 foundations: mindset, number 1, lifestyle, nutrition, and movement. The take homes from this, when it comes to mindset, is understanding the role of cortisol and understanding how mindset is a real driver to actions. And I often say, don't put the cart before the horse. Don't put the goals before the values. So previous posts, I've talked a lot about values, so have another look at those. But we want to start with our values. What stands for us? What's important for us? And for someone who's been doing a lot of dieting, yo-yos, self-care, self-love, self-respect, being a role model, optimal health, well-being, great energy, those should sit at the forefront. And then it's, okay, well, what's my goal? My goal might be, I want to lose weight. I want to lose some belly fat. Now I need to find my actions that align with my goal, that are moving me towards my goal, but essentially towards the values. So that's a really important part. In terms of lifestyle, sleep. It's so important. It's where the blood sugar during the fasted state goes into that zone if a person is healthy. But remember, if a person is pushing cortisol throughout the day, when they sleep, instead of using their body fat, they burn more muscle for fuel. So they're losing muscle mass and getting to kind of that, what they call skinny fat look. So we have to be careful of that. Cortisol has a catabolic or a breakdown mode. We want to be as relaxed, what we call parasympathetic, rest, digest, healing, growing. So when we're in sleep, we want to obviously go to bed as early as possible, wake up early, get the sunshine, move around, get the body going. Like I say, wake, water with some salt, walk, get the body moving. Relationships, obviously stresses, working on self-growth, working on anything from a lifestyle, looking at your setups for the day. Movement, I often talk about the 3 parts: the strength, the conditioning, and the flexibility. I'll put the walking with the conditioning, but walking should be just a given for everybody, doing as much as possible. Ideally, we do some muscle work that helps with metabolism, that helps give storage site for that extra fuel. We want to get the blood flow going, so cardio conditioning, but it may be mostly walking. If you can do some interval training, great, that helps, but just don't get injured. And that's why I'm big on mobility and flexibility. When it comes to diet, I spoke, first of all, the type of food is the first thing. You want to focus on real foods. You want to look also at the timing. So I've seen a lot of people who eat good meals. They're not athletes. They're not pregnant. They're not children, but they're eating. And so 3 meals plus 2 snacks. So constantly eating, and blood sugar just isn't going down. So sometimes we have to spread it out. Doesn't mean with intermittent fasting, I know many people, especially women, I'm against skipping breakfast. I prefer, if they want to fast, to take off, do the monk, breakfast and lunch and no dinner, or explore that, because if cortisol kicks hard in the morning, it can raise your blood sugar. So just listening to your body. But again, the best mark, or the best way to know how your body responds to things like fasting, macros, type of foods, is to measure it, which we'll talk about. So looking at the macros, protein is the driver. Protein is the most important. At Action Point, for some of you who've got to know me through Action Point, the fitness center here in Phuket, we start people 40% protein, 30 carb, 30 fat. And it gets adjusted. Maybe the carbs come down a bit depending on a person's insulin levels. But protein as the driver, protein as the most important. Fiber, vegetables essentially, especially I love my fermented vegetables. They're great for the microbiome, and the microbiome is really a massive part of balancing your blood sugar. So we're going to introduce that and as many minerals as nutrients as possible. And then calories. Eating too much is a problem. But as I say, if you eat real food with the right balance and not constantly, but sitting down with a meal, you listen to your body, then you can work out how much. But again, having a tool at the start can be really helpful to find out, okay, how much am I eating? Eat too much? Yeah, okay, that's one way to raise blood sugar. There'll be so much energy. Put too much fuel in the tank. So just some common questions. Can metabolic syndrome be reversed? We are not allowed, as a clinical nutritionist, I cannot say cured, but I've seen people with the markers of metabolic syndrome previously out of range, so not in the normal, move to optimal. See it all the time. That's why I love this job. So absolutely. Are there any supplements that can help? Berberine is getting a lot more publicity. It has a mechanism similar to metformin, that classic older pharmaceutical that was used before the Ozempics and the GLP-1s came in. So it's really helpful. Magnesium, and for relaxing, especially for balancing cortisol. People talk a lot about apple cider vinegar. I like the vinegars. I like the effect on the microbiome. Are they so amazing? Yeah, look, if you're using some vinegars, and they can be helpful, but again, they will not compare to reducing stress, reducing refined carbs and sugar. So it becomes a collective, but you might have it on your salad. Great. You got some fiber and you have some sort of in terms of vinegar, but berberine is a great one. Like I said, there are some others, chromium, certain minerals. It's really important to focus on all the minerals, as many vitamins as possible to see their balance, and then blood sugar will balance. What role does stress play? As I said previously, cortisol is a major driver, not just for simply increasing blood sugar, but also stimulating appetite for sugar or refined carbs. Is it genetic? The studies are pretty clear there is a genetic role. But often when I meet a family who all have metabolic syndrome, it's a combination, genetics and lifestyle. If anything, I'm a big fan of epigenetics. So what epigenetics means is that you have your genes, but above that are your choices, your lifestyle, your nutrition, and they are the biggest driver for a person's outcome. So a person may have a tendency towards blood sugar problems, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, but if the person is doing the core foundational healthy habits, then they can override that. What complications can arise? Many. So it is one of the leading factors, metabolic syndrome, towards heart disease, diabetes, and they are really just sad diseases to see a diabetic from amputations, from losing eyesight, from people having strokes and heart attacks, and the effects on them and their families. So it's something that we have a lot of control of. That's why I'm really passionate about it, because we can make such a big difference in our health when we focus on blood sugar regulation and focus on our metabolism. How is it related to obesity? Too much blood sugar, you stay in that range, especially over the 100, you're in storage mode. You're going to gain body fat. You're going to inflame the tissue. The liver is going to get overburdened. So absolutely direct relationship. How does it affect then I spoke about the liver, but the brain? It's inflammatory. So it causes too much blood sugar, too much fire in the body is inflaming the brain, which is why there are relationships with ADHD in children and a high sugar consumption, high blood sugar levels. It's why we call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So a definite relationship. And people who go on a low carb and even adding coconut oil, seeing benefits of that, using different fuels for the brain. Because we don't store energy in the brain, it's got to come up. And if the blood flow is inflammatory because of all the sugar, then we have a problem. How often should I get tested? Those markers, so the cholesterol, like the triglyceride, I definitely say within 12 weeks, but you could do it once a month. Triglycerides I love because it goes down, in terms of the centers, for those who I know through Amity, by people going through a fasting process, those who are set for it, not everybody should be doing full fasting, but the triglycerides moves the best. I've seen people go from well over 150 back to 100 in a couple of weeks because your body is using that fuel. Again, if a person was fasting, had a lot of stress, those wouldn't be those great results. So it should ideally be in a very relaxed manner, but doing it with a lower carb, more balanced diet, movement, it works beautifully for those triglycerides and in terms of also the fasting blood sugar. And then blood pressure should be coming down. What's the difference between metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance? Insulin resistance will be a driver for that metabolic syndrome. So insulin not doing its job properly leads to these other aspects, blood pressure, the lipids like the HDL, the triglycerides being affected. Who is at most risk for developing metabolic syndrome? We used to say just adults over these ages, because as we get older, our blood sugar ability to balance does decrease, but we're seeing it in young kids today. And this is really, it's very sad. Again, if you think about kids in terms of waistlines, we see high blood pressure in kids. So it is everybody. Again, only 1 in 8 people had those markers that were normal in the range. So it is one of our definitely problems today. Okay,